The Young and the Restless Spoilers. The streets of Nice were cloaked in an unnatural silence when the police discovered Audra's lifeless body sprawled in a dimly lit alley. A gunshot wound marking the tragic end of a woman who, for all her flaws, had only ever wanted to chase love and carve out a life on her own terms. The yellow tape wrapped around the crime scene stood as a stark reminder that even in a city of glamour, darkness thrived in its shadows. The moment word spread, it shocked Genoa City to its core. Audra Charles, once seen as cunning, manipulative, and bold, was now recast in death as a victim of cruelty far greater than any she had dealt. To many, she was a schemer. To Tucker, however, she was family in every way that mattered, and he was the first to react with the kind of raw grief only a man who had lost everything could show. When Tucker McCall stepped off the plane in Nice and rushed to the alley where police lights glared against cobblestones, he wasn't the businessman, the deal-maker, or the manipulatory, was simply a man undone by loss. The sight of Audra's body covered in a white sheet shattered him. His rage boiled over as officers tried to keep him back from the scene, the cordoned-off area holding not just her body, but every unspoken word, every bond left unresolved. He shouted her name, demanding answers from men who had none, the echo of his anguish ricocheting against stone walls that had seen centuries of tragedies. Tucker's grief was terrifying in its intensity, and everyone who saw it knew one thing: he would not rest until her killer was found. Already, suspicion was spiraling. The whispers pointed toward Kyle Abbott and Claire Grace Newman, to names tied so closely to Audra in life that their proximity in death felt too damning to ignore. Claire, fragile yet cunning in her own right, had every reason to resent Audra, who threatened her ties to Kyle. Kyle, meanwhile, was already a man teetering on the edge of darkness, his actions in Nice growing more erratic with each passing day. But suspicion was not proof, and the police, already stretched thin, urged restraint. They had little more than a body, a bullet casing, and a city of secrets. Yet in the world of the young and the restless, restraint is a word that rarely survives long. For Tucker, patience was impossible. In his mind, there was no time to wait for evidence, no space for doubt. With a pistol gripped in his hand, fueled by the raw combination of grief and vengeance, he stormed toward the Abbott estate. Rage blinded him to everything except the image of Kyle's face, the son of Jack Abbott, the man he believed had stolen Audra's future. He banged on the door, his voice like thunder, demanding Kyle face him, screaming for justice in a storm of fury that no one could calm. It was Jack who stepped forward, not Kyle. The patriarch, seasoned in decades of family betrayals and crises, stood in his son's defense, urging Tucker to put the gun down, to think clearly before another tragedy unfolded. Jack's voice trembled not from fear, but from the weight of knowing how quickly one moment of rage could destroy generations of legacies. The standoff at the Abbott home became a spectacle of grief and suspicion. Neighbors whispered, reporters lingered at the gates, and the name Audra was once again on everyone's lips, this time not as a schemer or survivor, but as a martyr in a story drenched in blood. The police, aware of Tucker's volatile presence, had already begun pulling evidence from the alley, but every clue seemed to lead nowhere definitive. The bullet had no clear origin. The alley had no cameras. Witnesses claimed to hear a scream, a gunshot, and footsteps, but in Nice, shadows run deep and truth often dissolves into rumor. Victor Newman, far from the streets of Nice, sat in the quiet of his home, the weight of decades pressing down upon him. For all his wealth and power, there was no insulation from suspicion, not this time. Audra had been tied to too many schemes, too many players, and Victor, master of manipulation, knew better than anyone that a good crime leaves no fingerprints, but many trails of suspicion. He asked himself whether he could have, even inadvertently, set the stage for her demise. Was it one of his whispered orders, one of his veiled threats, that pushed someone to pull the trigger? Was this blood on his hands too? His silence, His isolation was its own kind of admission, and though no one yet pointed a finger at him directly, Victor Newman was not blind to the possibility that fate was circling closer than ever before. In the days that followed, the mystery deepened. Police confirmed it was no random act. This was a targeted killing. The bullet had been aimed, the placement deliberate. Whoever pulled the trigger wanted Audra silenced permanently. Theories flourished. Some said Claire, desperate to preserve her fragile relationship with Kyle, had lashed out in jealousy. Others insisted Kyle himself, cornered by his own anger, had done what he once tried and failed to douse Audra from existence. A darker possibility whispered through the corridors of power. Victor, fearing Audra's knowledge of secrets that could unravel Newman Enterprises, had orchestrated her death quietly, pulling strings that no police investigation could cut. What the investigation would reveal remained uncertain, but one truth became clear: Audra Charles's death would not fade into silence. She had been many things: manipulator, lover, strategist, survivor. But in death, she became a symbol of unfinished business. Tucker's grief turned into obsession, a dangerous drive to avenge her that would put him on a collision course with the Abbotts. Kyle, regardless of guilt, now carried the weight of suspicion heavier than any corporate deal or romantic betrayal he had ever faced. Claire's fragile place in the world of Genoa City threatened to collapse under the glare of police scrutiny, and Victor, haunted by shadows of his own making, would sit in his mansion, wondering not if the walls were closing in, but how soon. In soap opera tradition, death is never just the end, it is a beginning, the spark of a storyline that unravels into betrayals, accusations, and shattered families. Audra's body in that alley is not simply a tragedy, it is a fuse, lit and burning, one that will force every character who ever crossed her to reckon with the firestorm that follows. And as Tucker's anguished cry echoed in the French night, one thing was certain: Genoa City would never be the same again. The fallout from Audra's shocking death in Nice quickly spreads across Genoa City like wildfire. And at the center of it all is Tucker McCall, consumed with grief but unwilling to let her murder remain a mystery. For Tucker, Audra was not just another pawn in the endless game of corporate power plays. She was someone he had come to care for deeply, perhaps more than he ever admitted. The sight of her lifeless body in the alley, the brutality of the gunshot that ended her life, ignited a fire in him that could not be extinguished by police reassurances or promises of a full investigation. Tucker vows that he will uncover the truth, and though the police begin to gather evidence, he takes matters into his own hands, determined to find the killer no matter where the trail leads. Suspicion naturally falls on Kyle Abbott and Victor Newman, two men whose tangled connections to Audra make them the most likely suspects in the eyes of the public. Kyle's volatile relationship with her, fueled by jealousy, betrayal, and a dangerous mix of lust and resentment, gives him a motive no one can ignore. His temper, already known to spiral beyond control, had made him appear unstable in recent weeks, and whispers grow louder that he might have taken his obsession too far. Victor, meanwhile, stands in the shadows, silent but deeply uneasy. With his history of manipulation and ruthlessness, it is not far-fetched to believe that he could have orchestrated Audra's death if he thought she had become a liability to his empire. Yet suspicion is not evidence, and both men, while shaken, deny any involvement. But the intrigue only thickens when another name is whispered in the shadows: Cain Ashby. Once written off as a manipulator and opportunist, Cain's darker instincts have resurfaced, and his reputation as a man who will do anything for survival makes him a compelling suspect. Could Cain have orchestrated Audra's murder to redirect suspicion toward Kyle and Victor? It would be a ruthless but cunning move, eliminating Audra while simultaneously weakening two of the most powerful men in Genoa City. For Cain, whose life has often been shaped by shadows and secrets, killing Audra could serve as both revenge and strategy, setting off a chain of events that destabilizes everyone around him while he quietly reaps the benefits. His presence looms large even without proof, a specter haunting the investigation and raising the possibility that the crime was not one of passion, but of calculated manipulation. While Tucker spirals deeper into his quest for vengeance, Claire finds herself in her own emotional quagmire. Her relationship with Kyle, already fragile, is shattered further when she uncovers yet another secret. She confronts him about the private arrangement he made with Victor, an agreement that had remained hidden but now comes to light at the worst possible moment. Her words shake Kyle to his core, because in confronting the truth, Claire not only exposes his duplicity, but also forces him to face the depth of his betrayal. For Claire, it is not just another lie, it is confirmation that Kyle has been protecting himself all along, not her, and that every word of reassurance he offered was tainted by hidden motives. The confrontation leaves her devastated, wondering whether there was ever any real trust between them, or if she had merely been another pawn in his endless game of self-preservation. The confrontation between Claire and Kyle is more than personal heartbreak. It reshapes the dynamics of power and trust in Genoa City. By bringing up the agreement with Victor, Claire forces Kyle into an impossible position. He must choose between confessing everything, risking exposure and the wrath of Victor, or continuing to hide behind half-truths, deepening the rift between them. Her insistence on clarity becomes a weapon of accountability, one that exposes Kyle's weakness and threatens to strip him of both allies and credibility. Meanwhile, at Newman Enterprises, Victoria finds herself stunned when she discovers her father's approach to the situation. Expecting Victor to dictate terms and control every move he always has his shock to realize that he is allowing Claire the freedom to make her own choices. Victor, who has spent his life orchestrating outcomes and crushing dissent, seems to recognize that Claire must decide her future for herself, even if it means distancing from the Newman name. For Victoria, this sudden willingness to let Claire stand on her own is both unsettling and enlightening. It forces her to reevaluate her father not just as the master manipulator, but as a man beginning to understand that even his power has limits when it comes to family. The layers of suspicion, betrayal, and shifting alliances converge into a storm that threatens to consume everyone. Tucker, reckless in his grief, will stop at nothing until Audra's killer is unmasked. Kyle, shaken and cornered, is forced to face the consequences of secrets that unravel his personal and professional world. Victor, haunted by his past and the shadow of suspicion, must walk a fine line between protecting his legacy and facing the possibility that his empire cannot shield him from the truth. Claire, torn between heartbreak and empowerment, confronts the reality that the man she thought she loved may be no better than the monsters she feared. And Kane, whether guilty or innocent, remains the wild card, his name whispered in alleys and boardrooms as the man who could have set the entire tragedy in motion. In the end, Audra's death is not just a singular tragedy, it is a catalyst, igniting rivalries, exposing hidden truths, and setting the stage for a reckoning that will reshape Genoa City's power balance. Whether it is Kyle, Victor, Kane, or someone entirely unexpected, the truth will come to light. But until then, every glance, every word, every secret carries the weight of suspicion, and the walls of loyalty and family trust grow thinner by the day.